It was an ordinary festive morning, when the sun seemed to promise a day of rest and laughter. Light rays, penetrating through the windows, illuminated the familiar picture of the morning house, starlings flying into the garden, and the fresh-smelling air filling the room. I was standing in the hallway, urging my son Patrick to hurry up to the baseball game. As always, he was late, lazily getting dressed, despite my insistence. I tried not to worry, because this day was not just a holiday, it was a moment when I could feel like a mother again, and not a restless woman who had been wandering around these rooms alone for 3 years. But suddenly the world as I knew it shattered. I opened the door, and there he stood on the threshold, my husband, Mark, with his unchanging confident posture and that look that always seemed both warm and cold. But this look was different. His eyes didn't have that calm, confident gleam that I remembered. There was some kind of confusion, and something else, unspeakable anxiety. I froze, unable to believe that he was standing in front of me, as if he hadn't disappeared. Time seemed to stand still. This moment became an invisible line, beyond which there was no longer a former life. Mark didn't move. He just stood there like a statue, not moving from his place. The silence that spread around us was thick and full, like a liquid filling the entire space. I felt like I was frozen in this hallway, like a ghost who had forgotten about his past. It was not just a moment of return, it was the intervention of something supernatural, carrying with it some kind of heaviness. "This is our home," he said at last. His voice sounded strange, there was urgency in it, but also uncertainty, as if he did not believe in what he was saying. I should have said something, but before I could realize his presence and what was happening, another figure appeared behind him. I couldn't immediately figure out who it was. My heart sank. It was Clara, my sister-in-law. Her gaze is cold, appraising, as if she didn't just come here, but was waiting for some moment. When she saw me, something cunning flashed in her eyes. I felt like my stomach was crawling into a vortex. This moment, this meeting, was like a signal to me. A nest of snakes suddenly bubbled up in my inner world. In its depths, I felt the same cold poison that I couldn't get out of myself, and it came to life again. "We're going to take custody of Patrick," Clara said, and her voice was filled with a sickly sweetness, like a snake that promises paradise before tasting the victim. These words, this tone. I remembered them all too well, that manipulative, enveloping voice that hid a cruel nature. I knew him too well. She knew how he could subjugate anyone by making them believe in false promises and ideals. I didn't want to hear that voice anymore, but now, standing here, unable to turn away, I was once again trapped in this trap that I couldn't get out of. I thought too often that Mark and Clara's disappearance could be connected. But after he disappeared, and especially after Clara disappeared at the same time as him, I never managed to put everything together. I didn't have the strength then, but now, when I stood in front of them again, helplessness gripped me again. How could this happen? Why didn't I notice all those little details that could have brought me to this moment? I was lost in these thoughts, barely hearing Patrick come up behind me. His voice suddenly broke through the impenetrable silence that filled the house. "Hey, Mom, who are you talking to?" I froze, my heart clenched in pain, because I couldn't protect him from what was about to happen. He stood there, my brave little boy, still unaware that his world was about to change. He didn't know that the world that seemed safe to him was still a crack that could collapse at any moment. He didn't know about the storm that was about to break over us. Clara turned to him, her face twisted into a strange, predatory smile. "Oh, it's nice to finally meet you. You're Patrick, right? I've wanted to meet you for so long." Her words, as always, sounded like honey. But it was poison that she poured without hesitation, enjoying the process. I felt everything in my body tense up, as if every cell was resisting this moment. Patrick looked at me sheepishly, and then looked back at them. "Dad, what are you doing here? And who is she?" His questions were full of childish naivety. He did not understand how dangerous this meeting was. He did not understand that this smile, this look, were not just empty words. He came closer to me, instinctively feeling the tension building, as an invisible threat began to vibrate in the air. We stood in the hallway, and while Mark and Clara silently watched like fish thrown out of the water, not expecting to meet them at such a moment, I knew one thing: this meeting, this moment, everything that brought us here was not an accident. And now I had to decide what to do next. Patrick continued, his voice shrill and tinged with anger cutting through the space. "We're going to leave." His words sounded like a verdict, like the final point in this strange and disturbing moment. But before they could finish, Mark and Clara noticed something behind me. Their faces, which had recently been full of confidence, had discolored, as if the air itself had become heavy and impenetrable for them. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly as I stood there. Everything that was happening seemed like an ironic, sinister theater playing out right in my house. And so, at that moment, as they stood dumbfounded, I felt something tremble inside me. And then I saw Patrick, with his head up and with a strength he rarely showed, stretch out his arms, taking his sister Eliza in his arms. The little girl, with a blissful, peaceful expression on her face, not realizing what her mother had just experienced, was already gurgling peacefully, babbling as if nothing had happened. Her innocence, her purity, was such a contrast to everything that was happening. It was like the meeting of two worlds, the world of a child and the world of a destroyed reality. Mark froze, his eyes wide with shock. He couldn't believe what he saw. His gaze darted between me, Patrick, and Clara. Clara was standing next to him, her eyes sparkling with displeasure, but there was a shadow of doubt on her face, as if she hadn't expected things to turn out this way. But I didn't care anymore. I knew that this moment was inevitable, and that no matter how hard they tried to turn things to their advantage, I was no longer the woman they once knew. I began to speak firmly, despite the storm in my heart, despite the fact that he stood in front of me like a shadow of my past. 3 years ago, you left without saying a word. My voice sounded heavy but firm. Every word was like a stone thrown into the abyss. I was left alone to pick up the pieces to raise Patrick and face an unexpected pregnancy. I did it alone, despite everything. I paused, letting my words soak into the air, settling into the mind of Clara, who stood in front of me with an expression that narrowed her eyes to a narrow slit. I continued without looking back at her. "I'm not the man you abandoned, Mark. I am not the woman you manipulated and deceived." I paused. "I have fought hard to build a life for my children and for myself. And I'm not going to let you, Walt, come back to destroy it." And although their faces were now a picture of shock, disbelief, and surprise, I saw a flicker of guilt in Clara's eyes. She was lost for a moment, as if her own image in the mirror had suddenly become a stranger to her. But as much as I wanted to believe that she was feeling at least a small amount of remorse, I knew it was too late for guilt. The wounds they inflicted were too deep, too painful to be healed by any word or gesture. "Please leave," I said, and there was not a single drop of doubt in my voice. "You have no right to be here." Those words came out of me like the last whisper, predicting the end of something old and dead. Mark opened his mouth, probably to offer some kind of excuse or beg for my forgiveness, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't need their excuses. I didn't want to bring them back to this house. I didn't want to continue a conversation that didn't make sense. Gritting my teeth, I closed the door in front of them to the past they imagined, to the illusions they were trying to revive. I turned to my children, and at that moment the world around me was filled with meaning again. I saw Patrick looking at me with a newfound respect. His eyes, which had once been filled with worry, now shone with determination and confidence. It was more than a simple endorsement. It was a recognition of the power that now lay at the core of our lives. And Eliza, unaware of anything, continued to gurgle and babble, her little fingers grabbing the air, and the world remained so simple and understandable for her. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my pounding heart. It wasn't that simple. This moment was just the beginning, because the front lines were now drawn, and I knew that I would be ready to fight for the future of my family. I was ready to do anything to protect them, to prevent the past, whatever it was, from bringing us back into this nightmare. The days following Mark and Clara's unwanted visit became a veritable whirlwind of emotions and memories, like a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. I suddenly began to remember the dark days after Mark's disappearance, sleepless nights when I couldn't take my eyes off the empty bed, when every rustle in the house seemed like a threat to me, when anxiety and worry consumed me. I sat for hours thinking about what I could have done differently when I didn't have enough words to figure out how to deal with this loneliness. But what really tormented me was what Patrick struggled with the most. He, once such a cheerful and sociable boy, has now become sullen. He averted his clear eyes, and they, once full of hope, now dimmed. I saw it happen, and I didn't know how to help him. But I knew one thing: I would do everything to make his light come on again, so that he would once again become that boy who enjoyed life. And I will fight, not counting the obstacles, to get him out of this shadow. I remembered the countless dinners he had postponed, the school events he had begged me not to attend, and the cold, distant looks that had replaced his warm smiles. These moments tore at my heart, leaving a mark that I couldn't heal. I was trying to figure out what had happened, what had changed in our house, what had made my boy become such a stranger. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a way to get to him, how to bring back the boy I once knew and loved. There was no room for answers in my heart, which was clenching with pain, and I felt the gap between us gradually growing. While I was immersed in these memories, Alice's innocent laughter echoed through the house. He was so pure and joyful that he seemed the exact opposite of the storm raging in my soul. It was a stark contrast. But in him, in her small figure, I found solace. She was my unexpected blessing, a light in a dark ocean where doubts and bitterness of betrayal had ruled for so long. Her birth was a turning point in my life, the moment when I once again believed in the possibility of happiness, although I could not understand exactly what it meant to me at that moment. One evening, when I put Patrick to bed, and the room was silent, almost ringing with tension, he turned to me with unusually serious eyes. His small face was full of questions that seemed to outweigh all adult concerns. "Mom, why did Dad leave us? Did we do something wrong?" His words hit me like a physical blow. I froze, not expecting such a question, and suddenly realized how deeply he was going through all this. He was not just my son, he became an adult in his pain, disagreement with the world that deceived him. I gathered all the strength in myself to answer. "No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong," I said, trying to sound confident, but I felt my words getting stuck in my throat. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, and it's not because of what you did. I paused, choosing the right words to convey to him at least some of the calm that I wanted to experience so much at that moment. I did not know why they came back, why with Aunt Clara. I fell silent, trying to figure out how to explain to him what I did not understand yet. But there was only a question in his eyes, leaving me no choice. He couldn't understand how this was possible, and his confusion was heartbreaking. But I know one thing, Patrick. I took a deep breath to calm down and continue. You and me and Eliza, we are a family. And we will overcome this. Together. He nodded slowly, his face was tense, his eyes didn't have the clarity they had before. Now he was a child carrying a load he shouldn't have been carrying. A load of questions that shouldn't have been asked of him. And in that moment, it became clear to me that, despite all my love and protection, I could not return his carelessness. I kissed him on the forehead, and he whispered to me, "I know, Mom. I would like that." The next morning, when all this storm in my soul had not subsided, I was literally excited by the lawyer's call. Mr. Thompson, with his practical and firm voice, announced, "Lauren, we need to discuss your legal options. Mark and Clara's claim is not substantiated, but we must prepare." His words were accurate, but for me they were a signal that the fight would start again. To fight back to ensure that Mark and Clara can no longer harm us. There was confidence in his voice, but also urgency. And it calmed me down, although I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of some huge, undeserved ordeal. But despite all the feelings that were boiling in my chest, I clearly understood that there was no way back in this process. "Let's do this," I said firmly, feeling a power awakening inside me that I hadn't counted on. "I want to protect my children, and I will not allow them to be used as pawns in whatever game Mark and Clara play." "You're making the right decision," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice reassuring. "I will start preparing the documents. We'll show them that they can't just walk past you." I felt a surge of determination building in my body. I was ready to fight, and there was no longer any doubt. It was my decision, and I wasn't going to give in. As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination swept over me. I knew they underestimated me. Mark and Clara thought that I would break under their pressure, that they would be able to regain control by playing with my life like a puppet. But they were wrong. And I was going to prove it. I became stronger, hardened by all the trials that I had to face. My life wasn't what it used to be. It couldn't be. I looked at Patrick playing with Eliza, and the ice melted in my heart. They were my children, my support, my only light in this world. I knew that I would do everything in my power to keep them safe, to protect them from any threat that might harm them. It was no longer about revenge. It wasn't just a desire to take revenge on those who betrayed me. It was about justice for my children. I was willing to do anything for them to grow up in a world free from fear and pain. Mark and Clara had awakened a fierce defense in me, and now I was ready to resist with all my might. It was not just a desire to avenge everything they had done, but a sincere desire to prevent their shadow from falling on my family again. I was ready to fight, ready to defend, because now all that mattered were my children. I looked at them and realized that none of their words or threats could shake my resolve. No memories, no feelings could have made me change my course. Gradually, the days turned into weeks, and my resolve hardened like steel. I was preparing for the upcoming litigation, but nothing could prepare me for the emotional war that followed. Mark and Clara, like vultures circling their prey, began their campaign to wear me down, destroy my confidence, and make me doubt myself. They weren't going to back down. Their attacks became more and more aggressive, and their presence was a dark cloud in the clear celestial space of my life. One day, when I was picking Patrick up from school, I saw them. They were standing on the same path where a few weeks ago I took my son to school with a smile on my face, not suspecting what would happen next. But now that they have appeared, the world around me has changed. Their presence felt like an icy wind in the face, like a dark cloud obscuring the bright sun. Clara's voice was sickeningly sweet as she called out to Patrick, "Hi, sweetie. We've missed you so much." These words became like a knife in my heart. She tried to make it all look innocent, but I could feel her manipulations, her desire to take over what had once been hers. Patrick clung to my arm, his small body tensed, and his gaze was full of fear and bewilderment. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. He felt that something was wrong. He knew that what was happening shouldn't have happened. And I knew that these people had no right to appear in our lives. They lost the right to do this a long time ago. Mark stepped forward, his face feigned, full of worry. "We just wanted to see you, son. You know we're your family." I felt anger boiling in my veins. I looked at him, and a fire broke out in my soul. "You lost the right to call yourself his family when you left him." I snapped, pulling Patrick closer, as if he were the only protection from these people. Clara's gaze narrowed. Its facade was no longer as immaculate as before. And when she didn't wait for an answer, she said hoarsely, "Lauren, you can't keep him from us. We have rights." Rights. These words sounded like mockery. I looked at them both, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Right? You don't have any rights." You both made your choice 3 years ago. Now live with it, I replied, and my voice was as cold as ice. Mark's face twisted with anger. He took a step towards me, but I didn't budge. I wasn't going to give in anymore. Do you think you're so perfect, Lauren? You're just a bitter woman who couldn't make her husband happy. I felt anger flare up in my chest, but I held back. I could have answered, I could have smashed his complacency to crumbs, but now the main thing was different. I looked back at Patrick, his small fingers gripped my hand tightly, and in his eyes I saw something that became a beacon for me: the need for security, for stability. He was afraid, but he believed in me. And that was enough. I looked at Clara and heard her threats again. You're going to regret this, Lauren. We'll get what we want this week. We always get our way. Their threats echoed in my head like stubborn, repetitive words. But I didn't let them see my fear. I couldn't let them feel my heart pounding with excitement. I had to be strong for Patrick and Eliza, so that they wouldn't feel threatened. I couldn't let them destroy the harmony that I had been creating for our family for so long. That night, as I lay in bed, their words haunted me like a shadow, haunting me. I couldn't get rid of the thought that losing Patrick was the worst thing that could happen to me. The thought that they might take him burned my soul. But I knew I couldn't afford to give up. I should have been smarter, stronger. It wasn't just my business. It was my commitment to my children, who relied on me. I couldn't lose them. I couldn't let these people destroy everything I had built. The next day I met with Mr. Thompson, and despite all the storm that was raging in my soul, my determination stood in front of him like an impenetrable shield. I knew this fight was going to be long and hard, but I also knew I had to win. I want full custody of Patrick, I said, not looking away. I want Mark and Clara not to have visitation rights. I can't let them break into our lives anymore. Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression becoming serious. He understood how much was at stake, and immediately got to work. It's going to be an uphill battle, Lauren, he said calmly, but I believe we can win this case. You're a good mother, and the court will see it. I didn't doubt his words, but it didn't lessen the severity of what was coming. Every day I plunged deeper into the legal struggle, and I felt the growing tension in every step. I couldn't afford to be weak because everything I loved was under threat. As the legal preparations progressed, I discovered an unexpected ally, Patrick. One evening he came up to me with such a serious expression on his face that it became difficult for me to breathe. I felt him growing up before my eyes. Mom, I want to tell the judge that I want to stay with you. Dad and Aunt Clara, they are not my family, he said with an innocent determination that left me in no doubt about his words. I stood in silence, my heart pounding in my chest, but not out of fear, out of gratitude and love. I hugged him tightly, feeling his small shoulders tremble, but he held on. Thank you, Patrick, I said, fighting back tears. This means more to me than you'll ever know. My words sounded like a promise. I won't let you down. When the day of the court session came, it came to me like a storm on the horizon, unexpected, inevitable, with a suffocating atmosphere of anxiety. I walked into the courtroom with Patrick, ready to fight for us, for our future. I knew we were going to face real manipulation, but I was ready. In the courtroom, everything was like a nightmare. Clara, playing a loving aunt. Her words were full of insincerity, like honey spreading over a spoon, sweet, but empty. Mark, on the other hand, was trying to play the role of a repentant father, his voice trembling with far-fetched regret, but there was something cold and calculating in his eyes. I could see it. But when Patrick's moment came, when his little voice cut through the air, everything changed. He stood up and said with complete confidence, I want to stay with my mom. She was by my side when no one else was around. I could feel those words cutting into my insides, like rocks flying into water and making it waver. The truth in his words was clear, pure, and strong. At that moment, it seemed to me that everything I had been through had brought me here, to this moment when Patrick and I, standing next to each other, could stand up to all those who wanted to tear us apart. When the judge made the decision, it seemed to me that a ray of light broke through the thick clouds that we were afraid of. My gaze met Patrick's, and I saw relief in his eyes. The court granted me full custody of Patrick, with a ban on any visitation rights for Mark and Clara. I knew it was just an interim victory, but at that moment it meant everything to me. When we left the courtroom, I didn't have to look at Mark and Clara to understand how they felt. Mark's face was a mask of rage, and Clara's eyes were burning with malice. Their defeat was palpable, but I didn't feel triumphant. Something else was important to me. Patrick and I won. We were safe. And it gave me strength. However, this temporary peace did not last long. Mark and Clara, like wounded animals, have become more desperate and dangerous. They started a smear campaign spreading lies and rumors about me in our community. It was a psychological war that I did not expect, but to which I had to adapt. The whispers behind my back, the fake smiles, and the distorted words were all part of the game they got me into. But now I knew they had underestimated me. I was ready for this. I was ready for any war that would threaten my children. In the evening, when Patrick came home from school, his eyes were full of unexpressed tears, and I immediately felt that something had happened. He stood in the doorway clutching his school bag as if it was the last thing connecting him to the world I was trying to protect. "Mom," his voice trembled, "the kids at school are saying that you stole me from Dad, that you're keeping me away from him because you're evil." Like a knife in my heart, his words cut through me, and it became difficult for me to breathe. I understood that in these moments I would have to be not only a mother, but also a defender of his soul. He was just a kid, and these rumors, these words that were thrown in his face, were destroying him from the inside. "Patrick," I leaned in to meet his eyes, "you know that's not true. Everything I did in order to protect you." He nodded, but there was so much doubt in his eyes that it seemed to me that I could not convey to him the full depth of what was happening. "I know, Mom," his voice was low, "but it's hard, they don't understand." I hugged him tightly, feeling his small body tremble. All I could tell him was that we could handle it. We were stronger lies than they thought. "I know it's hard, honey," I whispered in his ear. "But we'll get through this. We are stronger than their lies." With each passing day, the rumors became more vicious and venomous. Clara, always so cunning and calculating, now used words as a weapon. She turned the world upside down by falsely accusing me, and this dealt a blow not only to me, but also to my children. I felt the tyranny of their words engulfing the space around us, and it was scary. I knew I had to resist, but was I ready to sink to their level? Was it worth it? However, one day Mark came to my workplace. His face was frozen in a mask of remorse, but I could see that it was just his game. He came up to me, and his words were sweet but full of venom. "Lauren, can't we just talk about this for Patrick's sake?" His voice was soft, but I could see the hidden threat in his eyes. I looked at him straight and answered firmly, "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. You've made your choice. Now live with it." But his reaction was instantaneous. He grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. His fingers cut through the skin, and I had to force myself not to pull my hand away so as not to show how much it hurt. "You're ruining my life, Lauren, you and this child." His words were full of hatred. I had to almost physically break free from his grip. I couldn't help myself and replied firmly, "No, Mark. You did it yourself." When I broke this contact, my voice was as cold as ice. He couldn't make me give up. I turned and walked away, but his words followed me like a shadow with every step. "It's not over yet, Lauren," his voice sounded menacing. "I will not give up so easily." Although the court decision gave me custody of Patrick, it did not end the war. Mark and Clara were ruthless, and I could see that they would continue to fight. With each new step, I felt their attacking actions turn into a real psychological war. They were trying to break me, to break my confidence, to destroy our strong bond with Patrick. But I couldn't let that happen. And so, one late evening, Patrick came to me. His face was etched with conflict, his small lips trembled as he said, "Mom, what if Dad changes? What if he wants to be a real dad?" His words hit me hard, as if he had openly given me his heart. There was so much hope and fear in his question at the same time. I understood that he was going through an internal struggle, torn between what he knew about his biological father and what I could give him. He was at a loss, and I could see how this question was tormenting him. I took his hands, stroking them, and said, trying to put into my voice all the love and confidence I could give him, "I know that he is your father, Patrick, and it's okay to hope for that. But we have to see people for who they are, not for who we want them to be." He paused, looking up at me full of unspoken questions, and for a moment there was a light reflected in his eyes, as if he understood something. He nodded, and I felt his small body relax in my arms. "I know," he said, his voice low but firm. "I just wish things were different." And at that moment I realized that, despite all the trials, I had to be strong not only for myself, but also for him. "We'll get through this together." I held Patrick closer, wrapping my arms around him, as if I could become his armor, protection from the whole world. He clung to me, and his small shoulders were shaking with pent-up emotions. "Me too, Patrick, me too," I whispered, trying to put into words all the love and strength that I could give him at that moment. Despite the ongoing battle, I needed to make sure that Patrick and Elise remained my priorities, that they were safe, and that they knew that I would fight for them to the end. They were my strength, my stars illuminating the darkness. They were the spark for which I continued to stand, even when the whole world seemed dark. I fought not only for myself, but also for them. I would do anything to protect them, to give them the life they deserved, free from the deception and manipulation of Mark and Clara. But their campaign, this relentless attack, continued to take on darker outlines. Mark and Clara did not limit themselves to rumors and slander. Their actions took the form of outright harassment. They seemed to be everywhere, at my workplace, near Patrick's school, even on the streets of our neighborhood. Always somewhere in the shadows, always with an unkind look, always ready to appear where you don't expect them. It was like a psychological siege, and I felt its weight on me every day. But I wasn't going to give in. I refused to be afraid. Their plan was simple, to break me, to make me give up. But I wasn't going to let that happen. It's time to strike back. I decided it was time to act decisively, to show them that they can't just trample on our lives without consequences. I had scheduled a meeting with Mr. Thompson, and his gaze, when I expressed my intentions, was full of determination and approval. We were on the same wavelength. "Mr. Thompson, it's time to take more drastic measures. I want to file a restraining order against Mark and Clara. I want to sue them for harassment and defamation," I said, looking into his eyes. I felt this moment, this determination, becoming a part of me. He nodded, agreeing with my words. "I think it's a wise decision, Lauren. My God, their behavior is unacceptable. We can't let them continue. The legal proceedings have become a real test." In court, I stood firm as a rock, despite the pressure and their manipulations. Mark was a skilled actor. He skillfully played the role of an offended and humiliated man, and Clara, with her tears and furious accusations, tried to arouse pity from everyone present by portraying herself as a victim. She complained about how she was denied the right to be a part of her nephew's life. But their performance was inconclusive. The words they said did not hide the truth, and the judge saw it. When he issued the decision, a restraining order that deprived Mark and Clara of the right to contact us, as well as an order for damages for their defamatory actions, I felt the severity of the last few weeks ease a little. Patrick and Eliza and I were standing in the courtroom, and I knew that this was our victory. But despite this, Mark's face was contorted with rage, and Clara's eyes burned with anger and threats that she did not dare to say out loud. I knew that winning in court would not stop them. This war was just beginning. No matter how hard I tried to believe in law and justice, their malice was not defeated. On the contrary, they only became more dangerous, their revenge more fierce. And soon I got a phone call that made me feel like icy needles were stitching through my spine. I found out the number before I picked up the phone, and my heart stopped. "Do you think you've won, Lauren?" Mark's voice was cold, full of hatred and hidden threats. "Do you think you can just ruin my life and leave?" His words penetrated me like sharp knives, making my heart clench with fear, but I did not allow myself to give up. I won't let him intimidate me. I will do everything to protect my children, despite the fact that he and Clara will do everything possible to destroy us. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the fear caused by his words, which cut through the silence like a knife. They hung in the air, heavy and ominous, carrying the promise of pain. But I didn't let that threat break me. I spat, as if relieving myself of the weight of his words, and hung up. The toxic cloud he had created with his call continued to hang in the air, but I was determined not to let it affect me. I will not let him dictate my life, and most importantly, the lives of my children. Patrick and Eliza, they were my world. Every day I thought about them, their safety, their future. These were my only stars in this storm, and I would do anything to protect them from Mark and Clara's malice. But no matter how hard I tried to stay strong, the days turned into weeks, and the pressure wouldn't let go. The endless vigilance, the fear that Mark might do the next thing, it all ate me up from the inside. Fear was always there, like a shadow, and every day it became more and more severe. A single mother is a constant struggle. Fatigue and endless tension, which did not let go, affected me. I didn't have to show it, but the storm inside me wouldn't subside. One evening, as I was putting Eliza to bed, I noticed how restless Patrick looked. He was already older, and his eyes were no longer so childish, they saw more than they should have. "Mom, what if Dad gets mad again?" "He's very angry on the phone," he said, his voice full of concern. I felt my heart ache for him, for his little soul, which bore all these burdens. He was trying to be strong, but I saw his world crumbling because of what was happening. I hugged him tighter, hugging him to me as if I could protect him from the whole world. "Bear, we're going to be fine," I whispered, trying to put all my confidence into these words. "I won't let anything happen to us, I promise." But despite my words, I knew that the battle was far from over. Mark and Clara, these constant threats and their agonizing silence, like a thunderstorm on the horizon, were just the beginning of something new. This lull, which came after the court decision, was only temporary. I felt that at any moment they could strike again. Months passed, but the tension did not subside. Mark and Clara could no longer directly threaten us, their actions were limited by a restraining order. However, their silence was far more disturbing. It was the calm before the storm, and I was ready for anything they could give us. I kept on the defensive because I knew sooner or later they would try to break the rules. And then, one day, it happened. Clara, in a fit of pure desperation, decided to make a scene. I was in the store when she suddenly appeared out of nowhere like a storm, carrying all her rage. Her scream tore the air. "You're a monster, Lauren. You've torn our family apart." Her voice was full of hatred and pain, as if she couldn't forgive me for the very fact of my existence. She shouted accusations, attracting the attention of passers-by, gathering people around her who were ready to witness her theatrical drama. I stood my ground. My voice was firm and decisive. "Clara, you need to leave. You're violating a restraining order." Her face twisted with rage. "I don't care what you say. I will fight for the truth. The world needs to see what you really are." But her screams and heightened emotions had their consequences. The store manager, seeing how the situation was getting out of control, quickly called the police. When they arrived, Clara was taken away from the scene. Her image of an offended woman was only a confirmation of her manipulative behavior. With each of her screams, she lost her face, becoming more and more like a toy in her own hands. And so, in the end, her theatrical scandal was the last straw. The police accused Clara of violating a restraining order and organizing a public disorder. When she was taken away and there was silence in the air, I felt something inside me disintegrate. That's what I was waiting for. Clara couldn't hide her identity anymore, and now she was on edge. Mark faced the consequences that were inevitable after his involvement in harassment and defamation. Everything they had hidden behind masks of lies and manipulation had now been exposed, and his arrest was the final point. I stood at a distance, watching them sink into their abyss. When he was taken away, part of me felt a pang of pity. I couldn't help but feel some sympathy, because now they themselves were in a hole that they had dug with their own hands. Their world, built on lies and hatred, collapsed with the same destructive forces with which they tried to destroy us. However, this feeling was quickly overshadowed by a sense of justice. I stood there watching them fall, and it was clear to me that this was not just the end of their attempts to destroy us. It was the moment when they finally faced the consequences of their actions. I thought about how much they had taken from us, how they had destroyed our world with their evil deeds. But now that everything was revealed, I felt the heavy burden of loss disappear from my shoulders. The moment when society finally realized the truth about Mark and Clara was sweet. The very people who used to whisper behind my back now came up and apologized, expressing support. I heard it again, but now their words did not bring me satisfaction, but rather a sense of completion. It was not just a victory in court, it was a victory of truth, a rebirth of justice. I felt myself let go, as the cloud of anxiety that had been hanging over us for so long finally began to dissipate. But Patrick, my dear Patrick, who witnessed all this, had mixed emotions. I could see his gaze flickering between relief and guilt. He couldn't be happy about the arrest of his father and aunt, and I understood him. "It's wrong to be happy," he told me one day, looking at the floor. "I shouldn't be happy about what happened to them." I took his hand, feeling his little heart struggling with what was happening. "It's okay, little bear," I told him, trying to explain that at his age it's hard to understand such things. "They caused us a lot of pain. And you don't have to feel guilty that justice has been served." I continued, trying to convey an important truth to him. It's okay to want justice. It's not your fault that they can't understand how their actions hurt us. The battle that consumed our lives for months finally seemed to be over. We had all experienced its severity, but now that Mark and Clara were forced to face the results of their evil deeds, I felt like most of our struggle was over. That they were once powerful figures capable of intimidating us has now become nothing more than a memory of their former power, which has melted away like mist under the rays of the sun. That evening, when I put Patrick and Eliza to bed, I was overcome by a feeling of deep peace. It was an unusual feeling because the last few months have been filled with anxiety. But now that we've been through this horror, I felt all the heaviness go away, and light comes in its place. We survived the storm and became stronger. There was something comforting about the stillness that filled the house, as if I could finally exhale. I knew that new challenges were ahead of us, that life would not become cloudless instantly. But at that moment, in those few moments of silence and peace, I felt hope for the future for the first time in a long time. Remembering how hard it had been for me and the children in recent months, I realized that now we were on the threshold of something new and better. The legal retribution of Mark and Clara lifted a heavy burden from us, and the days seemed brighter. It seemed that the light had returned to our house again, as if a new dawn had come after long months of night. And one day, I noticed that our house was filled with laughter again. At first it was Eliza's quiet, careful giggling, her little ringing laugh that spread through the house like a ray of light. And then Patrick, his smile returned, the same sincere and warm as it had been before, when the world seemed simple and safe. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when the shadows left by Mark and Clara finally began to disappear, and in their place a new life filled with light and laughter appeared. The support of the community was huge, like a wave rolling in every minute, pushing aside the clouds and leaving behind only a bright, clear sky. The apologies I received from acquaintances, friends, and even those who once did not believe, have now turned into real offers of help. People I didn't expect anything from offered me a shoulder, support, and participation in our lives. The whispers and rumors that once echoed in every corner of the city gradually disappeared, like the darkness that recedes before the rising sun. We were rebuilding our lives, step by step, world by world, and although the process was slow, it was inevitable. The rebirth of our harmony was probably the strongest feeling I've ever experienced. We walked forward, leaving everything behind. But the true testimony of our new, bright world came on my birthday. Patrick, now more mature and thoughtful, came up to me with a shy smile and a small gift in his hand. He seemed a little nervous, but his eyes shone with real pride, and I felt his love envelop me. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said with such sincerity that my heart fluttered. He handed me a beautiful photo frame, neatly decorated with his own hands. It showed a picture of him and Eliza and me, the three of us, all smiling, happily captured at a time when the world seemed not yet lost. Tears of gratitude and love filled my eyes. I hugged him tightly, not knowing how to convey all the tenderness that enveloped me. "Thank you, Patrick, this is the best gift I could ever ask for," I whispered, feeling my heart overflow with warmth. It was a moment that will remain in my memory forever, the moment when my son brought me a piece of happiness that did not depend on anything external, but was simply an expression of our connection, our rebirth. Later that day, we had a little party. Our little family, gathered together again, seemed to feel that we had returned to something important, to our roots, which we tried so desperately to preserve. The evening was full of laughter, cheerful conversations, and joyful faces who came to support us. Our friends and neighbors, those who stayed with us, were now part of this new world that we were entering. Every face, every word supported us and gave us confidence that we had finally found peace. And at that moment, a new person appeared. It was Tom, a kind and understanding man whom I met through my work. His support during our trials was unwavering, and now his presence in our lives has become a symbol of new beginnings. His gaze was warm, sincere, and I could feel how his concern for us had become a real bulwark. "Happy birthday, Lauren," he said, his eyes expressing more than just congratulations. "I hope this year will bring you all the happiness you deserve." I smiled, feeling a spark of something new ignite in my heart. "Thank you, Tom, this is already a good start," I replied, realizing that our future had indeed become bright. The party continued, and I was happy that Patrick, despite all his restraint, felt at home. He came up to me, his face serious, full of thought. "Mom," he began softly, "I was thinking, maybe we can start something new to be happy again." I knelt down to meet his gaze, and felt my world fall into place at that moment. "It's more than okay, Patrick," I said, covering his hand with mine. "We've been through a lot, and we deserve it. We deserve to be happy." He nodded, and a slight smile lit up his lips. "I like Tom, he's cute, and I think he makes you happy." These words were full of naive, but so sincere wisdom. I hugged him tightly, filled with gratitude. My son, who is small, but already understands what it means to give and accept love, what it means to be happy after everything has been lost and found again. That night, as I put Patrick and Eliza to bed, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't known for many years. We faced our demons and emerged victorious. It was long awaited, but finally accomplished. Our future was ours. We went through the storm and found ourselves on the other shore, where a new life full of promise awaited. Life threw us into stormy waters, and I couldn't help but think that everything we've been through has taught us to be strong. We have learned to navigate this storm. And now, as we stood on the threshold of a new dawn, I felt a fresh, clear wind bringing with it the promise of happiness and new beginnings. We were ready for this.